The investors were unconvinced by the original proposal. "The concept has potential," one of them remarked, "but people like Tori prove that simply building muscle isn't enough. You can spend years training someone and still end up with a result that doesn't match the vision. Look at many professional athletes. Strong and capable, certainly, but not what audiences expect from a cinematic action hero." After weeks of discussion, the production team believed they had found a better solution. "You can't take someone completely unsuitable for the role and transform them overnight," they explained. "Even with intense training, it could take years before they look the part. We need a different approach." At the time, I knew none of this. I had answered an advertisement seeking attractive young men for a major action film. Curious and hopeful, I contacted the agency and was quickly invited to an audition. They warned me that even if I wasn't selected immediately, I would still need to complete a series of fitness assessments and medical examinations. I agreed without hesitation. The audition itself was surprisingly simple. There were a few questions, numerous photographs, and a detailed physical evaluation. They measured everything: height, weight, chest size, waist, thighs, arm circumference, and overall strength. It felt more like being assessed for a sports team than a movie role. Several days later, I received a callback. Excited by the opportunity, I celebrated with my girlfriend despite our empty bank accounts. We treated ourselves to dinner and spent the evening imagining how life might change if I landed the role. When I arrived for the second round, only 3 other candidates remained. We shared similar features. None of us were particularly tall, and while we were fit, none had the massive physiques of professional bodybuilders. One candidate was noticeably leaner than the rest. 2 had shoulder-length hair that gave them a softer appearance, while another, like me, kept his hair short. The director eventually stepped out of his office and addressed us. "Here's the situation," he said. "Funding is still being finalized. Production won't begin until every financial detail is settled. In the meantime, we'd like to keep you on retainer. You'll be paid while training with us." None of us objected. Being paid to train sounded like a dream. The director looked directly at me and another candidate. "You two need longer hair," he explained, handing us bottles of supplements. "Take these as instructed. If filming began tomorrow, we'd rely on extensions, but natural growth would be preferable." The next day our real training began. Since several of us lived far away, accommodations had been arranged inside a converted warehouse complex in Greenwich. We packed our belongings, signed additional paperwork, and moved in. At first, I assumed we would return home on weekends. I was mistaken. The production was supposedly connected to highly confidential material, and strict secrecy agreements prevented us from discussing anything outside the facility. Communication with the outside world became limited, and before long, we settled into an isolated routine. Still, everything was provided for us: food, housing, equipment, and salaries. As the days passed, the 4 of us became friends. There was Jason, who shared my competitive nature; Mike, who never seemed to stop joking; and Bluey, whose nickname came from his unusually bright blue eyes. Our physical instructor, Catherine, pushed us relentlessly. Although all 4 of us already had martial arts experience, she focused heavily on grappling techniques, balance, leverage, and control. She constantly reminded us that technique could overcome raw strength. Dialogue coaching came next. A woman named Tracy worked with us on speech patterns, delivery, posture, and screen presence. She insisted that acting required complete transformation, not simply memorizing lines. Soon afterward, the director introduced another member of the team. "This is Terry," he announced. "The story contains an unusual sequence. Your characters will briefly disguise themselves as women. Some scenes require close-up shots, so you'll need to move and behave convincingly." What began as a simple acting exercise quickly expanded into a regular part of training. Terry brought racks of clothing, accessories, and endless lessons about posture, movement, and presentation. We learned how different footwear affected balance, how clothing altered body language, and how small gestures could completely change a character's appearance. Surprisingly, none of us questioned it. The training became routine. Meanwhile, our physical conditioning intensified. The nutrition plan emphasized lean protein and strict calorie control. Weight training focused on endurance and definition rather than maximum strength. Week after week, body fat decreased and our physiques became noticeably more refined. At the same time, several cosmetic procedures were offered to improve our marketability. The director presented it as an investment. Better looks mean better opportunities, he explained. If you choose any procedures, you'll sign an agreement granting the company a small percentage of your future earnings. It sounded like an unbelievable bargain. Based on professional evaluations, each of us received recommendations. Some chose minor treatments, while others opted for more extensive cosmetic work. I eventually agreed to several procedures myself. Recovery took weeks. Bandages concealed the results, leaving me curious about how much I had changed. By the time everything healed, I barely recognized the reflection staring back at me. The face looking back was undeniably mine, yet it appeared smoother, more symmetrical, and dramatically different from before. Combined with my now shoulder-length hair and the wardrobe used during training sessions, the transformation felt almost unreal. I couldn't wait to see the reactions of friends and family once I finally returned home. Training continued relentlessly. Catherine introduced advanced balance exercises, many of which involved high-heeled shoes. According to her, the goal was precision, coordination, and complete body awareness. The polished wooden training floor soon carried countless marks from our practice sessions. At first, maintaining balance seemed impossible. Eventually, however, it became second nature. As my hair repeatedly fell across my eyes during sparring drills, I found myself adapting without thinking. Jason, Mike, and Bluey attacked from every angle during practice matches, yet technique increasingly mattered more than strength. What had begun as preparation for a film had evolved into something far more comprehensive. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new changes. And none of us could predict where the journey would ultimately lead. I had to admit that the transformation was becoming impossible to ignore. Weeks of training, dieting, grooming, and endless coaching sessions had changed all of us dramatically. Standing together in our fitted training outfits, we barely resembled the men who had first arrived at the warehouse months earlier. The full body waxing had been an experience none of us wanted to repeat, but there was one undeniable benefit: no more constant shaving. It was a small comfort in the middle of everything else that was changing. One afternoon, Jack gathered us together after training. "The financing is nearly complete," he announced with obvious excitement. Production could begin sooner than expected. We exchanged excited glances. Finally, all those months of preparation were about to mean something. As I bent over to catch my breath after a particularly demanding workout, I noticed something that had become increasingly common. My body no longer moved the way it once had. My balance, posture, and even the way my clothes fit felt different. Jack continued speaking. "The producers want complete realism for the opening sequences. Originally we planned to rely on special effects and costume pieces, but after reviewing the footage, they've decided they want something more convincing for close-up shots." Nobody interrupted him. "We'll be making some adjustments so that everything looks natural on camera. You'll have time to get used to the changes before filming starts." Surprisingly, none of us objected. At this point, adapting had become part of the job. The day after the procedures, however, something felt different. Not physically, mentally. The four of us sat together and looked at one another. For the first time, we truly saw how much we had changed. No one said anything for several moments. Finally, Mike laughed. "We don't look anything like we used to." He wasn't wrong. We still felt like ourselves. Our personalities were unchanged. Our memories were unchanged. Yet the reflections staring back at us in every mirror told a different story. Mark had transformed the most dramatically. With his sleek dark hair, refined features, and elegant posture, he looked like he belonged on the cover of a fashion magazine. Bluey's bright eyes remained his most striking feature. They projected confidence and intelligence, giving him the appearance of someone who naturally commanded attention. Jason still carried the athletic energy he always had, but his appearance had become softer and younger. There was an almost effortless charm about him that cameras seemed to love. As for me, I became the group's unofficial showpiece. My hair had been lightened and styled into soft waves. My facial features appeared more refined than before, and the wardrobe department seemed determined to place me in the most eye-catching outfits possible. Jason jokingly referred to me as the glamour star. I pretended to be annoyed. Truthfully, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Part of me enjoyed the attention. Another part worried that the role was beginning to define me. Soon afterward, we were officially assigned our characters. Months of preparation suddenly felt real. Every costume fitting, every training session, every coaching exercise now had a purpose. Some of us had to work harder than others to adjust to our new appearances and movement styles, but surprisingly, everything began falling into place. The more we practiced, the more natural it felt. The production team seemed delighted. One evening, while we reviewed footage from a training session, Jack and Brandon watched from the control room. "They've completely embraced the roles," Brandon observed. Jack nodded. "The audience is going to believe every second of it." Our costumes became increasingly elaborate. Mine was a bright pink catsuit that quickly became associated with my character. Terry insisted it perfectly matched the larger-than-life personality she wanted me to project. Whenever I caught my reflection, I almost felt like I was looking at a comic book heroine brought to life. The outfit emphasized every curve and contour, creating an exaggerated but undeniably striking appearance. The others never let me forget it. "You were born to wear that thing," Jason joked. I rolled my eyes every time he said it. Still, I secretly knew he wasn't entirely wrong. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Rehearsals grew longer. Fight choreography became more complex. Publicity photographs were taken almost daily. Before long, filming finally began. The production team decided to test audience reactions by placing our characters in a live entertainment event connected to the show. The atmosphere was electric. Thousands of spectators filled the venue. Cameras covered every angle. Energy pulsed through the arena. My role was relatively simple. I was supposed to escort one of the larger competitors to the ring, and then react dramatically when events unfolded around me. What should have been a minor appearance unexpectedly became one of the highlights of the night. The audience loved every moment. They cheered, laughed, clapped, and most importantly, they remembered the characters. By the end of the performance, social media and promotional reports were flooded with positive reactions. Backstage, Jack could barely contain his excitement. "You two stole the entire show," he said while reviewing audience feedback. "The response has been incredible." Malice and I exchanged shocked looks. We had expected to blend into the larger production. Instead, people were talking about us more than some of the featured performers.